Hi, my name is Joe Smith, and I'm the director at the Royal Geographical Society in London. It's such an honour to speak to you and to be in this amazing lineup across this weekend. I was honoured also to be one of the speakers at last year's inaugural festival, and I got a huge amount out of tuning in to the programme across the weekend. Thank you to the imaginative and hard-working organisers of this great thing. So last year I made a rather bold statement, irresponsible even, when I claimed that humanity could make this its best century yet. Now, you could call me glib, naive, trite. It turns out that the English have quite a few different ways of dismissing optimism. Well, today I'm going to once again challenge that half of me that's North American and insist that we take on a can-do attitude. In fact, I'm going to be even more glib, naive, trite, optimistic, hopeful in the next 20 minutes or so. I want to try and convince you that we already know the recipes that could serve up our best century yet. And today I'm going to give you a version of mine. Let me recap a couple of the points I made this time last year. First, when you look at the evolution of environmental ideas in the last 50 years or so, you have to recognize that we've come a very long way in a very short space of time. In the midst of the great acceleration of the 20th century, with its massive expansion of human impacts on the non-human natural world, we also saw a parallel acceleration in our understanding of Earth's systems. Among other things, this took us to an understanding of global environmental systems and the far-reaching interdependencies and interrelationships that make them up. For me, this has helped to finish Darwin's sentence. In other words, it's helped us to understand ourselves as in and of the natural world. And I think that thought could be enormously powerful in the years to come. So I believe we are seeing the right conditions for what could be, if we make that the case, an unstoppable outbreak of wisdom. So I'm going to try to present this as a recipe. In the UK, there's a popular TV show called Ready, Steady, Cook, where you have to pull together a dish in a short space of time with the cameras on you. And this format has spread around the world, probably because it's painful to watch people suffer as they struggle with the challenge. In Poland, I know it's known as Smacznego, and in the US, it's known as Ready, Steady, Cook. Sorry, Ready, Set, Cook. I don't know what the other formats are called, versions of the format are called. So I'm going to try and do the same and offer you a recipe for our best century yet, working only with available ingredients. A few props I might draw on are a tin of emergency drinking water from the Cold War, a tin of genuine Canadian Centennial Air from 1967, the year of my birth. These may or may not reappear. A blue marble I may reference at some point. And I'll just tease you with this. You may not yet know what it is. If you email me with a correct answer, I'll just say, well done, thank you very much. There isn't a prize. No, I'll probably tell you what it is as time goes by. So the available ingredients. As I say, you can only work with what you've already got in the cupboard in that game. And that's a relevant reference point for me because we almost certainly haven't got time to develop and deploy new technologies at scale. But picking up tips that I've gathered from the world's greatest sustainability chefs over the last 30 years, I think I've got a pretty robust recipe for what would create a much more sustainable world. The sustainable world, that blue marble, often called fragile. Now, actually, I think we ought to recognize that the Earth and its systems themselves are not fragile. It's the sweet spot for humanity that we've arrived at that is fragile. And we need to do all we can if we want to stick around to ensure that this wonderful blue marble allows us, its situation, our own situation being the fragile thing, to succeed on it. Now, what I'm going to propose isn't a fixed and unchanging recipe. I'm pretty sure it'll work even if you vary the quantities of the ingredients in different places and at different times. Indeed, recipes for change are a bit like comedy or tax systems. They tend to be very culturally specific. So give this a try where you are, but you will need to give it your own local twist. And do please share your tips and variations as you go. This is going to be a learning experience for all of us. Now, in my version, I think there are 5 key ingredients. You may come to your own number. The first is a stable political consensus on key ideas that can be sustained in democratic systems through 3 or 4 election cycles. And that's because we can't keep turning backwards and restarting the process and winning the arguments once again. We have to have these ideas sustained over time. Now, in some parts of the world, you might have to reach right to the back of the cupboard for this one and blow the dust off this ingredient if you're living in one of the all too numerous polarized societies around the world. But we need to take all of the main political parties in democracies and, where possible, the dominant forces in other political systems to the point where they all commit to sticking to the script on climate change and biodiversity protection day in, day out for the rest of their career. So fair enough, news of airport extensions, road building, or obsessions with clumsy and outdated metrics, summarized as economic growth figures, all make it sound like we haven't even got this first ingredient onto the table. But I think we start from a surprisingly good place. Let's start by considering where the electorate's heads are at. And this is also true in countries without democracies. When you look at polling data, you find that awareness of humanity's huge environmental impacts has been building nicely over time, and that there is now a really chunky majority of concerned or very concerned people on environmental issues, people who recognize the need for action. And politicians have been recognizing that and reflecting that in words, at least. In parallel, that concern is unlocking a great tide of determination and innovation that's found in more than pockets now of business and local government and cities. And that itself will propel mainstream politicians to a new perspective. But concern on its own doesn't give us this first ingredient in our recipe for change. It has to be translated into commitments that are shared across political parties and even competed over in green beauty contests at every election. So, how to win these commitments? Again, I think there's some good news to be found in political contests of recent years around the world. It's becoming increasingly difficult to find countries where, at local and national level, whole parties oppose sustained action on big environmental issues. I think we've seen the climate issue tilt just in the last 2 years. There might be conflict within parties and recalcitrants here and there who wrap themselves in their flag and promote simplistic narratives about how logging or an unconstrained fossil fuel industry serves the poor and unemployed. But the tide is going out on these short-termist arguments and on the idea that parties can win majorities in democratic systems without recognizing the force of logic that our economy is underpinned by our ecology. But those of us that hold to these ideas need to allow them to be palatable across the political spectrum and a whole range of political philosophies. Some of us respond to the idea of conservation of treasured things. Others are motivated by the sharing of collective goods. Our political consensus needs to get comfortable with this range of motivations for caring about our planet. Progress at international level would have been impossible without such a big tent approach. Keystone international events, including the United Nations Conferences of Parties, or COPs, on biodiversity and climate change this year in China and the UK and Italy, have the power to ratchet forward our ambitions and to publicly bind leaders into broad coalitions of the willing. All the countries in the international system are bound into these processes. Competition for international leadership is hotting up. These are moments when the backsliders can be publicly embarrassed, and we should all take those opportunities, but also remember to reward leading politicians with the odd thank you as well. But for that first ingredient to really release its flavor, we do need a second ingredient, which is to recognize that the policies that are designed at the core of those political programs are designed around the need to recognize responsibilities and to protect against vulnerabilities. Now, a key feature of our knowledge of global environmental issues is that responsibility and vulnerability tends to be very unevenly distributed. So we know that environmental degradation of the last 100, 150 years should be laid at the door of the economic powerhouses of the great acceleration, above all, Europe and North America. I mentioned timekeeping, so I'll tell you what this is. It's an egg timer from probably the 1830s, 1840s. I come from a long line of clockmakers. We've been clockmakers for 250 years. And going back 6 generations, my antecedent was trained by the person that made this in Derby. Sometimes Derbyshire is called the hearthstone of the Industrial Revolution. So if you're looking for someone who is genetically responsible for climate change, you could pick me, because without time measurement devices, you couldn't have the Industrial Revolution, and you couldn't have burnt a huge portion of coal and later oil and gas to power the great acceleration in consumption that we've seen. So I'm responsible. And the poorest countries and the poorest people in them are going to be the most vulnerable to the consequences of climate change and other forms of global environmental degradation. We have to make sure that the policies we devise acknowledge both responsibility and vulnerability. And I'll pick that up more in my next ingredient. But we have a set of good, hard thinking delivered in the form of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to help guide our way. They give us a broad and sophisticated framework in which to both think and measure our progress. And that balancing of responsibility and vulnerability is found in many of the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. Just one thing about this ingredient, though. We've got 17 goals, there are 169 indicators, and even more social and environmental objectives clustered under them. It's a great plan, a great process, a great toolbox of approaches, but a vanishingly small number of people are aware of them. We have to do something to turn sustainability into a compelling story. That story will be easier to hear if we get our third ingredient right, and that's about the better pricing of goods that embed our best guess of the full social and environmental costs of products, including prominently an end to fossil fuel subsidy and introducing forms of taxation or pricing for carbon particularly, but also valuing our key natural resources, including forests. So this is really about making sure you can afford all of your ingredients. Some just aren't worth the price, but some new stuff you can find on the market does the job. In some ways, even better. I'm thinking of renewables here. Now, it's important to recognize that as I said, taxing, a bit like comedy, is very culturally specific. There will not be one answer fits all here, but broad principles and frameworks can help. And of course, in a globalized economy, common rules are going to be vital in order to put the right price on things. Now, it's also worth saying that if we've got sticks over here in terms of putting the right price on goods and services, we also need some carrots to balance that with. And one of my answers to that is that we will be protecting some of the absolute essentials of life and improving quality of life and public health. So my emergency drinking water from the Cold War, we've learned in recent decades how to deliver clean water and sanitation to every household on the planet. We've just got to get on with it. Unlocking resources by taxing certain things and pricing certain things better will allow us to pay for those essential needs. Ditto, whoever you are, and if you're living in a town or a city, you suffer from dreadful air quality. And here, my 1967 Canadian Centennial Air is a sort of jokey reminder of the fact that the quality of air isn't what it could be. And action on climate change is going to deliver vastly improved quality of air and quality of life. And prioritizing green modes of walking and cycling will take us to a better place in terms of everyday life. Now, I've already really summarized my fourth ingredient, which is that revising some taxes and prices will open up space to reduce others. Now, I can't do a better job than a US Republican politician who came up with the phrase carbon-funded tax reductions. So his point was that there are political opportunities for people coming from the right to address climate change. And from his perspective, it was about the opportunity, if you added a tax load to fossil fuels, you could actually reduce the tax load on businesses and incentivize entrepreneurship. So this is what I mean by actually a political coalition for action on climate change doesn't mean everyone will end up saying the same thing. In a way, we want to see competition and argument about the best and fastest way, remembering our ticking clock, the importance of recognizing the limited time we've got. That competition in the policy space, as much as in the commercial and entrepreneurial space, is going to be really important to unlock initiative and allow for pace. So now to my last ingredient. We've got a lot to do, and we haven't got a lot of time to do it in. However, we are the most imaginative, energetic, and purposeful species when we put our mind to it. And one of the things that we can do to speed the pace is to support and reward experiment and innovation. Now, I've touched on some of the ways in which we can do that at the level of the economy, through economic signals that reward entrepreneurship and successful innovation. But also we can and should reward and thank people around us that help move things on. That might be a good citizen, a purposeful local politician. It might be through prizes like the Earthshot Prize, which will be gathering global attention to some big ideas. I show gratitude every single day, thinking of my grandmother, who, when she died at 101, left me a little bit of money, which I put into solar PV panels that are on my roof. So in rainy, windy, cloudy Britain, half of my electricity comes from solar panels, thank you, sun, and from my grandmother, thank you, Granny. And These are small ways in which I am reminded every single day that through innovation and determination, humanity at its best, we really can address the challenges in front of us. So in conclusion, this dish can serve well over 7 billion people very successfully. I think we don't spend enough time reminding ourselves that, this could be good. Let's stop talking about approaching sustainability as being a diet of austerity and denial. And let's shout from the rooftops that we're going to end up with something much more satisfying and enjoyable than what we've been served up every day until now. Thank you for listening.